Beware the Fish by Gordon Korman. But will it fly? Miss Scrimmage, said Mr. Sturgeon into the telephone on Sunday morning, I do not follow your line of reasoning. How can it possibly be the fault of MacDonald Hall that your automobile insurance rates are going up? And I also strongly doubt that my boys were over on your lawn scaring your girls with loud noise. It has been my experience that nothing scares your girls. Miss Scrimmage, right beside the accelerator is another pedal. It activates the braking mechanism. Its function is to stop your vehicle's forward momentum, thus avoiding an incident such as occurred yesterday. I would venture to say that any of my boys without a lesson or license could figure that out. I am not bugging you, Miss Scrimmage. You telephoned me. Good day. William, said his wife thoughtfully, the boys were over there yesterday. I told you they were getting the two school bands together. They were even on the early news last night. Yes, said Mr. Sturgeon with a crooked smile. That's the last time I leave Mr. Fudge in charge of the campus. He was probably taking a nap, and they say nothing wakes him up. The point is, however, that even though our boys had no business being over at scrimmages, they were not at the wheel of the truck when it drove into that limousine. Miss Scrimmage was. That car belonged to the land developer, didn't it? The one who was coming here to look at MacDonald Hall? It did. Miss Scrimmage seems to have adequately deterred him. Mr. Sturgeon switched on the television set. The band was on the news, you say? Maybe it will be on again this morning. It's almost time for the 10 o'clock report. They watched a cartoon for a few minutes, and then the local newscaster came on the air. He smiled, opened his mouth to speak, and vanished. Once again, the fish image monopolized the screen. The audio crackled with static. Then a voice said, A certain someone proved to be an asset rather than a liability yesterday. We of the Fish Patrol extend our thanks. There was a wicked laugh. We will crush all who oppose us. Beware the fish. The newscaster reappeared. Mildred, said Mr. Sturgeon, perplexed, why does that comment ring a bell? Why do I have the feeling that I should know that voice? Oh, you're just tired and overwrought, dear, soothed his wife. Have another cup of coffee. Sergeant Featherstone stared at the television set in horror as the fish faded away. A certain someone, who was obviously Featherstone himself, had been of assistance to the fish's operation. But how? How could he have done those fiends a favor? Could it be that he, an officer of the law, had unwittingly become a tool in the hands of the forces of evil? But he had done nothing in the past few days beyond acquiring and studying the fish's code book. They were bluffing. They had to be. He was getting close. They had found out that he could not be scared off by threats of violence, and now they were trying to make him believe that the code book was worthless. Oh yes, he was getting very close. Bruno, what are you moping about? Asked Boots. We've been on television, haven't we? Yeah, said Bruno savagely, in front of Scrimmage's school, as the Scrim Band. That kind of publicity does nothing for MacDonald Hall. Well, we got rid of the developer, pointed out Boots optimistically. If he's really dead set on building those apartments, retorted Bruno, he'll be back. He won't let Miss Scrimmage stop him. It's ready, announced Elmer. Not now, Elm, said Bruno, still talking to Boots. And as for the band practices, he went on, I guess we were pretty stupid to think that a little noise would drive a guy away from a multi-million-dollar business deal. It's ready, repeated Elmer. What's ready? Asked Bruno impatiently. My remote control device, said Elmer. It's ready for testing. Well, why didn't you say so? Cried Bruno, jumping to his feet. How do we go about testing it? We simply take it outdoors and fly it, said Elmer. Great, exclaimed Bruno. We'll do it right now. Where's the best place? Actually, the only place to test the mechanism properly would be an area where there are trees. This would enable me to test the maneuverability, and more important, to see how my signals travel when there are solid obstacles about. What about the woods right in back? Suggested Boots. Elmer shook his head. No good. The trees are much too close together. There would be a crash. Scrimmage's apple orchard, decided Bruno. It's perfect. Yes, it would be ideal, Elmer agreed. However, I strongly doubt that Mr. Sturgeon or Miss Scrimmage would grant permission, relations being rather strained lately between our two respective schools. Yes, agreed Bruno, but they couldn't object if they didn't know about it. No, Boots said simply, we're not going there again. Don't be ridiculous, scoffed Bruno. The old girl guards her young ladies, not her apples. We're going tonight. Protested Elmer uneasily. I'm not sure I want to. What? A pair of chickens, interrupted Bruno. The matter is settled. To emphasize his point, he switched on Elmer's video machine. Greetings once more from the Fish Patrol, crackled the now familiar voice from Featherstone's television set. We announce that Operation Flying Fish will commence tonight at midnight. You never know when the fish may descend on you. Beware the fish. But where? Exclaimed Featherstone in frustration as the fish image disappeared from the screen. He knew only one thing. It was up to him to foil Operation Flying Fish, as he had Operation Pop Can, if only he knew where to begin. That's so annoying, exclaimed Mrs. Sturgeon, switching off the TV. They just can't seem to put a stop to it. Mildred, said the headmaster. I'm sure I know that voice. I'm sure I do. I just can't place it. Well, whoever it is, she said, I hope they catch him and punish him severely. I'm sick of this. Mr. Sturgeon frowned. I'm positive I know that voice. At 11:30 that night, Sergeant Featherstone left his motel room and got into his car, intent on searching for Operation Flying Fish. He wasn't going to the Chutney Town dump, he decided. That was the place they'd use as a base of operations after... That was the last place they'd use as a base of operations after he'd been there to spoil Operation Popcan for them. And so, for lack of inspiration, he turned off Main Street in the opposite direction. The door of room 14 opened, and a cadaverous man hurried out and got into his car. The tires squealed as he started out in pursuit of Featherstone. The midnight solitude of Miss Scrimmage's apple orchard was disturbed as three shadowy figures laden with parcels eased themselves over the wire fence and crept into the cover of the trees. Here's a good spot, said Bruno, dropping his burden. Elmer, too frightened to speak, nodded. Boots was also nervous. Any sign of Miss Scrimmage or her shotgun? Bruno did not reply. Okay, Elmer, set it up. Obediently, Elmer got to work. In 15 minutes, he had assembled a large console with operating buttons and a tall antenna. In his hands, he held a metal sphere studded with Christmas tree lights. You're going to fly that? Asked Bruno. That's not an airplane. Elmer flicked a switch on the console to turn on the green and red bulbs. This will fly, he replied with great satisfaction. Well, said Bruno impatiently, let's see it. Do you have to have it lit up like that? Asked Boots. We don't want old Scrimmage over here, you know. Elmer placed the ball inside the black tube attached to the console. I must see if I'm going to guide it, he explained patiently. And now the test. Wait, said Bruno suddenly, pulling the ball out of the tube. It's bad luck to launch a ship without a name, with a marking penny carefully printed. M.H. Flying Fish on a clear patch of the metal. M.H.? questioned Boots. McDonald Hall, of course, said Bruno. He returned the little craft to the tube. And now, the test, he mimicked. Elmer flicked a switch and turned a dial. There was a clunk, and the M.H. Flying Fish rocketed out of the tube and hovered among the branches of the trees, humming as it awaited instructions. Hot gazoobies! Cheered Bruno as he and Boots stared at the ball, which illuminated the portion of the orchard where they stood. Skillfully, Elmer manipulated the controls, putting his craft through a series of maneuvers in, around, and over the trees. Suddenly, there was a rustling in the darkness behind them, and a voice called, Halt! The three boys wheeled in horror. Kathy Burton appeared from behind a tree. Just kidding, she grinned. She glanced behind her. Come on out, Diane. I told you it had to be them. Diane appeared at her side. What are you guys doing? What is that thing? It's our ship, replied Bruno. Elmer will explain it to you. Elmer shook his head violently, unable to speak in the presence of the girls. Oh, it's Elmer, said Kathy. She strode over to the console. Hey, decent. What does this thing do? She grasped one of the dials and twisted it as far as it would go. No! Cried Elmer. The M.H. Flying Fish shot up and away into the sky. Elmer frantically hit buttons, but to no avail. The hum of the motor was gone. The distant lights could no longer be seen. Our ship! Cried Bruno. Bring it back! I can't, said Elmer sadly. It's out of range. Oops, said Kathy. Sorry. Kathy, moaned Bruno in anguish. That was going to make us famous, and you lost it. Sorry, repeated Kathy. Maybe you can build another one. She smiled brightly. Anybody want something to eat? I want to go home, groaned Elmer miserably. Yeah, muttered Boots. Let's get out of here. Are you very mad? Asked Kathy penitently. Bruno shrugged. It's gone. I guess killing you won't change that. The three boys picked up their equipment. Intruders, halt! Shrieked a voice in the distance. A perfect ending to a perfect evening, moaned Boots. Here she comes again, agreed Kathy. You guys get going. What about you? Asked Bruno. Don't worry about us, said Kathy. If she catches us, we'll just tell her you've been terrorizing us again. Carrying their equipment, the three boys vaulted the fence and ran off into the night. Featherstone cruised aimlessly, alert for anything unusual that might be part of Operation Flying Fish. All was quiet. The farmhouses were dark, the fields deserted. Suddenly he heard a strange, distant humming noise. He rolled down the window to listen. Yes, it was definitely a hum, and it was growing louder. He stopped the car and stuck his head out the window. What the heck? He gasped. In the sky, approaching rapidly from the south, was a brightly lit UFO. There was a sudden screeching of brakes, and Featherstone turned just in time to see another car skid out and around in front of him, missing him by a hair. He gasped in horror. It was the man from room 14, the fish. It was a trap. He had been lured out here onto a lonely road. The UFO was almost upon him now, but the fish was blocking the highway. Blindly, Featherstone pushed the accelerator to the floor. The small car shot off the road and smashed through an old wooden fence, coming to rest in the middle of a large pig pen. Frightened, squealing pigs stampeded through the hole in the fence, disappearing into the night. Featherstone kicked madly at the gas pedal. The tires spun in the mud, but the car would not move. Desperately, he looked around. He could see the UFO clearly now as it bore down on him from the sky, its red and green lights outlining a round body. Plop! The object landed in the mud of the pig pen, not a foot from the car. Take cover! Shouted Featherstone to himself. Frantically, he kicked the door open and threw himself out of the car to land face down in the slop trough. He lay there tensely, waiting for an explosion. Nothing happened. Cautiously, he stole a look at the device. The green and red lights were flickering out, and the hum was dying. Slowly, he picked himself up out of the trough and stood, dripping slops, staring down at the ball lying in the mud. The hum was gone now, the lights out. The sole remaining pig approached the now dead UFO and rooted at it with his snout. Then, finding it of little interest, he, too, trotted out through the hole Featherstone's car had made in the fence. Covered in mud and pig slops, Featherstone tried to evaluate the situation he found himself in. Once again, he could remember no precedent in the RCMP training manual. He glanced back at the road. The man from room 14 had left the scene. The round object, whatever it was, seemed to present no immediate danger. The first order of business, then, must be to extricate himself from the muck of the pig pen and get the UFO back to his motel room for examination. Featherstone wrinkled his nose ruefully, and a shower wouldn't hurt. He glanced at his car. The mud was over the hubcaps. It was a job for a tow truck, possibly even a wrecker. From his pocket, he produced an identification card, and with his index finger, wiped the mud from the fence. He placed it under the windshield wiper for the benefit of the farmer, who was in for a shock. Then he tucked the surprisingly light UFO under his arm and began the long walk to Chutney, leaving a trail of mud and slime behind him. Miss Scrimmage, demanded Mr. Sturgeon into the telephone, do you realize it is almost 2 a.m? My boys were doing what? Bombs? Oh, yes, atomic bombs, no doubt. Oh, just ordinary bombs. Really, Miss Scrimmage, you must attempt to control your imagination. My boys do not have access to bombs. That's right, especially not flying bombs with red and green lights. Well, yes, Miss Scrimmage, sometimes our eyes deceive us. We've been under considerable stress lately. Good night. He turned to his wife. Mildred, according to Miss Scrimmage, our boys laid down an artillery barrage on their campus tonight. That's nice, murmured Mrs. Sturgeon sleepily. Go back to sleep, dear. And that's the end of that chapter.